Having a Gas is the podcast that talks to the great and the good of the creative industries, and in particular finds out what makes great music for film, for TV, for commercials, for dancing to, for cooking to, and more.
Today I'm having a gas with Richard Huntington, chairman of the board at Saatchi Saatchi, perhaps Britain's most notorious ad agency, responsible for campaigns such as Direct Line's Winston Wolfe, EE's Kevin Bacon series, and helping to propel the Conservative Party to victory in 1979.
Just briefly, before we go through some of the questions that I had for you, your current role is chairman and chief strategy officer at Saatchi's, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And so what does your life look like day to day?
Well, I mean, I think that the truth in our industry nowadays is you're a practitioner or your overhead. And so, I'm a planner by trade. I've got these grand titles, but I'm a planner by trade. And a day today looked a lot to me like planning. And I think one of the things about being a CSO is you're just the most useful strategist. It's not you're better than anybody else, but you're able to turn your hand to repositioning a big service organization or the call to action on a radio ad. That's what you've got to be able to do. So those titles all sound very grand, but I'm a jobbing planner basically. And I was going to say maybe I'm allowed to say that. I fucking love it because it's kept me going for 30 years now, and I still find we've got a brilliant industry under lots of pressure, brilliant industry, and it's a brilliant part of the industry. I always think, when account handlers are whinging about their jobs, they go, "I gave it up 3 years in and became a planner." You sort out your problem, and your. So this is all about. Ultimately about the use and role of music in the creative industries, yeah?
Well, that's certainly what I like to talk to people about. But obviously in your case, I make exceptions when people have something interesting to talk about besides that. And obviously I saw your piece in Campaign that was talking about the fact that our economic models and our economy is feeling a little bit fragile. The axioms behind why we act the way we do economically are a little bit, we're being questioned. And so, I wanted to talk to you a bit about that. And then, of course, we can get into some music if we still have time, because, there's nothing better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really enjoyed your questions. And I know we'll just have a kind of free-flowing discussion, I'm sure. But, I hasten to add, I'm a gobshite ad man, not an economist.
Of course.
And so, I think, that said, I've spent 30 years as a servant of capitalism, and you're either happy with that or you're not happy with that. And I think just as I've always felt that advertising is too powerful to be left to people who don't care about it, I think there's a sort of duty of care that comes if you're. I mean, I wouldn't say like I'm I'm not an ardent capitalist, and I'm politically very much more left of centre, but I think this is a system that served us reasonably well, and it seems to be in some crisis. And what I was interested in a little bit about is about the way in which the lockdown had led to different behaviours from companies and organisations that looked to me or smelt to me a lot like stakeholder capitalism that people have talked about forever, but nobody's really engaged with.
So what does that mean? That was the key question. What does stakeholder capitalism mean? Because you make the distinction between stakeholder and shareholder capitalism. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of fascinating. When I started in the business, literally every pitch would start with the objective would be to grow shareholder value. Like we don't do that any longer. But I remember back at Abbott Mead in the mid 90s, every pitch started in that way. And I think that sort of, that emerges from sort of Milton Friedman and the kind of neoliberal kind of emerging thinking in the 70s and 80s led to Thatcherism and monetarism. They sort of said, business has only one purpose: to return shareholder value. And weirdly enough, an earlier thought, which emerged, I think, from Stanford in the 60s, was this idea that actually businesses have multiple stakeholders and that a business's responsibility is to serve all of those stakeholders, not just its shareholders. And I think that while we talk about that quite a lot, I think that I'm really interested in the idea of what a business's duty to serve is, what your duty to serve is, as opposed to, and we might come on to this, sort of more mundane thinking about kind of purpose marketing, purpose beyond profit, all of that consensus, which is, I'm an active member of the sort of strategy Twitter sphere, and it's a sort of orthodoxy that's held strong for a long time now around the importance of purpose, and I'm not entirely sure about it.
Why not?
I think it's fashionable. I think that it's. I think that it's too often so divorced from commercial realities that organizations struggle to take it to their heart. So you see a purposing kind of agenda in an organization, and there's lots of heat around it, and then it sort of fades away. And my observation is that it's often because it's not really connected enough to the way that company makes money. There's this phrase, purpose beyond profit. I much prefer the idea of your purpose should be the means by which you make profit, and that's why I like duty to serve as an idea, because it seems to me that an organisation might be better off sitting down and thinking, what is our specific duty to serve? Given what we do, what we make, our expertise, what is it that we're on the hook for, really? And I think that's what came out. That's what, whether they called it this or not, that's what lots of companies asked themselves when we went into lockdown, which is, lots of people went, our duty is simply to put out vacuous ads shot on iPhones, celebrating quirky lockdown life, or thanking key workers, which we had no intention of improving our products or services for. But some organizations kind of stepped up. And I think there's lots of evidence now that organizations that stepped up during that crisis, are those that have come out much more likely to win in terms of consumer affection. And okay, it's just one pandemic doesn't make a change to capitalism, but I'm really interested in those sort of those early signs that something might have happened. Of course, the opposite may be true as well, that we all I call it the recoil now. We had the crisis, then the recoil, like where the behaviors spin back, all that sort of, looking out for each other, caring for vulnerable people, does that all return to how it was, or have we had a fundamental reset? I think that's going to be one of the interesting things going forward, as well as there's a very real problem now around an economy in recession, huge amounts of unemployment. Whether people will have money to achieve the things that they want to achieve.
What kind of things do you come to mind for you when you're saying money to achieve the things they want to achieve? Is it starting businesses, buying property, things like that?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be it's a bit more basic than that. Make sure my family has a holiday. I think we're staring into an economic abyss to a certain extent, and okay, maybe I've heard that Bill Gates is saying I'll be done by end of 2021, and maybe there will be something very deep that we bounce back out of. But there's going to be a lot of pain. You have to be quite a cold-hearted economist, or maybe the richest man in the world, though perhaps now it's Jeff Bezos, to be slightly that detracted. I think there are going to be millions of families across this country who simply don't have the money that they had, and it was never that much. Whether that is through unemployment, whether that's because the benefit system doesn't support people, whether that's because people like me, who at the moment are lucky enough to be in employment and earn an okay wage, whether actually that there's a culture of thrift. We saw that a bit in 2008, 2009, 2010, that, consumption is not fashionable, and there's a culture around thrift. So either you're not going to have money, or you're going to be very careful about spending money. And both of those, are difficult for an economy trying to recover.
Yeah, someone I tend to find myself quoting quite a lot is a chap called Douglas Murray. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff. Yeah, and he said it's understandable that younger people might not be enthusiastic about capitalism if they feel that they cannot accrue capital, like the fundamental, mean purpose of that system. I'm like you, but even less so. I'm no economist, and I don't understand how things work at all. But I do know that there's a growing dissatisfaction with capitalism amongst young people. Now, maybe that's perpetual. Maybe it's always that younger people are criticizing, the system that is, because the purpose of being young is to change systems. But I don't know if it's been as loud, that criticism of capitalism been as loud as it is now for some time. And so, obviously one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the fact that you made this point in campaign. You said you can't be an advertiser and be anti-capitalist, really, or have I got that wrong? No.
I think whenever I talk to people about their personal code of ethics, I think it's desperately important that whatever you do, you have your own moral compass. You have a personal code of ethics. There's stuff you will do. There's stuff you won't do. You have to be quite any service organization where you're representing other people or other businesses. You've got to be super clear on that. But the one thing I end up going, and I fundamentally believe that we all do the best job when we believe in what we're selling. Yeah, so that's always sort of helped me enormously. Do I believe, or how can I believe in what I'm selling? But I think ultimately you have to be sort of okay with capitalism to work in advertising, because we're servants of capitalism. The very concept of brand is about surplus value. Brands exist in order to extract more value from the purchaser than the tangible qualities of that product might not ordinarily deliver. So as far as I understand the economics of capitalism, that is at the heart of it. The extraction of surplus value. It's why we pay people slightly less than the value they deliver for us, and it's why brands are valuable for organizations, because they've got an economic multiplier that means you can charge more than it costs you to make that product. So I think it's difficult to be anti-capitalist and work in advertising. And I think that, kind of communications without capitalism is sort of, it's like public information or it's propaganda, but it's not the thing that I think we all do, which is we fundamentally we generate desire, and then help people satisfy or meet that desire, and it's only half the story for organizations. Like the supply side of their business is always under question, and we can only, as an industry, except when we cut our fees, we can only help the sort of the demand side. But we're really bloody good at that. You had Rory Sutherland on the podcast, and I think he's just one of those people who is all about, how do you get people to do things? How do you generate desire? How do you turn base metals into gold? I think that alchemy is sort of But that's the magic of creativity, isn't it? When that creativity is at the strategy end of things, which I occupy, or in the executional end of things. We know there's something fucked up in human minds that means that the world is a sort of slightly mercurial and magical place.
Yeah, you can be convinced that Guinness is really cool if you see a short film about people surfing.
Yeah. I think that's a brand that has built that reputation over a long period of time, and but Surfer is without doubt contributed manifestly to what I carry around in my mind. If brands are just that load of junk and stuff I carry around in my mind about an organization or a product or service, without a doubt, it's hard for me to think about Guinness without thinking about those communications. And because I'm as old as I am, I go back to Rutger Hauer, in the 80s, who was this weird personification of that brand. It's all in the mix, isn't it? Plus every other experience I've ever had of that business or brand, all rammed in there, and I'm still fascinated in how you marshal that and influence it. In the very concept, I guess, we're sort of straying off the subject a little bit, the very concept that the brands don't really belong to organizations at all. It's a very odd concept to have a brand manager. So it implies you manage the brand. I mean, the brand exists in people's minds, and our job is, I was thinking it's a bit like, I have in my mind often like one man and his dog. The way that a sheepdog and his own, that will be trying to get the sheep to corral them to go into a pen, and I think a brand is like a whole bunch of sheep wanting to go their own way, and if you send the sheepdog round to sort of marshal them and bring them, to move them in the direction you want to move them. That's sort of what we tend to do. I think it's very hard to control a brand.
Yeah, but someone in a larger and larger organizations, there's always going to be a multitude of forces trying to pull the business or the brand in a certain direction. Is that what you're saying? You see the purpose of the brand manager is to keep it moving in a single direction?
Yeah, I think I'm just making a sort of slightly kind of arsey point about a belief that companies and organizations own their brand.
Yes.
But I think the point we touch on there is that the concept of brand is much more complex in large organizations, in particular in service organizations with large employee bases. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about how you build and influence people's perceptions of a brand like BT, like HSBC, like EE, like Direct Line, where that brand isn't delivered by some packaging on a shelf and some nice advertising. It's delivered by real people, and so they're inherently more difficult to control in that classic sense.
Right. I was going back onto the direction in which things more generally are going. Well, for the industry, one thing I've wanted to get your take on, and certainly people at the upper levels, is there's an increasing call for marketing to be done with in a less amoral way, in a more ethical way, you might say. And I'm interested in, I'm hopeful that we can be economically healthy, prosperous, we can continue to grow, but we can also be ecologically sustainable. Now, I'm by no means a campaigner for this, because I don't have the expertise or the knowledge, but I know that there's interest in it. Is there going to come a time where, like in the 1960s, when you had to decide whether you were going to market tobacco or not, and at some point that became, regulated against, are marketers and advertisers going to have to decide whether they do advertise cars, for example, or things like this, with the increasing consumer concern about sustainability?
I think that's a absolutely critical balancing act. Because if I think right now what this country needs and what this economy needs and what our businesses need and their employees, who are our consumers, is getting back to growth, and I think there's a massive imperative for our industry to sell, basically. but there's no long-term future for any of us unless we can build businesses and build a source of prosperity which is sustainable. I mean that in the broadest sense. I mean, literally, it seems to me, just as I don't understand somebody who says, as I think one of our cabinet ministers did, I'm not a feminist. I mean, I don't understand that concept of not being a feminist. I also don't understand the concept of not valuing sustainability, since it's simply the ability in lots of ways to be able to continue to enjoy the things that you enjoy or do the things that you do, and the ability to not just make a profit today, but to make profit in the future, because the regulatory environment hasn't changed, or you haven't destroyed the raw materials that are the source of the things that you make. There's a huge tension in that, but we have to find a way to balance it, because there is a short-term need for us to kickstart this economy. But what we know is that longer term, we have to find a better balance, particularly around things like. I talked a little bit about inequality. It seems to me that there's an inherent characteristic of capitalism, which it piles cash in the hands of fewer and fewer people. I mean, it would naturally do that if if you believe in that idea of surplus value. But the problem is that eats itself, because we are much more healthy as an economy if a large number of people have some money rather than a small number of people have all the money. So I think that capitalism needs regulating and regulating better than it is at the moment, because it has this sort of self-destructive characteristic. And I know some people love the idea of sort of disaster capitalism. I'm not that fond of it. Just to your point about ethics and morality, I am a big fan that we're, just as we're servants of capitalism, we are servants of society as an industry, and society decides what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And big debate at the moment about high fat, salt, sugar content foods, and the idea of not just excluding kids, but a 9 p.m. watershed. I think ultimately it is for society to decide. When I started in this industry, advertising tampons was illegal and advertising tobacco was legal. We've now decided as a society, not an industry, as a society, that's the wrong way round.
Yeah, and I think that's speaks to the point of things being more bottom up than is often considered. So this is a point Rory made when he came on. He was saying that the lockdown followed everyone locking themselves down. Policy followed public behavior, and not vice versa. So, because I don't know whereabouts in London you are, but I'm presuming you started to notice a decline in people pretty rapidly in March.
Yeah, it's really weird. We will be called to remember what actually happened. I was reading something somewhere where somebody was saying we will edit out the last 4 months. We will have very sketchy kind of understanding of what the hell did we do. I think for us it happened very fast, and I think it is to a certain extent the government's eternal shame. Not that they were alone, but that organisations made those decisions, not, and shops and pubs were all left and made those decisions themselves. And then once that had started happening, policy sort of followed. I feel it exactly the same way coming out of the lockdown. Policy has followed behaviour. I'm not entirely sure that's the right way around. But I think you're possibly making the point about. I think that I'm just not very fond, I suppose, of the idea that in some way business or marketing or advertising stands against changes in the regulatory environment or in what society deems important or acceptable. I think we have to accept that we are much more much closer participants in our culture and our society than that. We're not sort of bystanders.
Yes, but what do you also make of the some talk in Adland that would imply that advertisers are not bystanders nor participants, but actually what's a good metaphor? Megaphone to dictate or suggest to people how they ought to behave and live. As if we stand not outside it, but almost above it. And
no, I think you're right, and I think there's because we are constant. I think there's an engine that goes because we're constantly searching for ways to engage people and interest them in services and products and behaviors that we're by necessity shopping at the edges of behavior, of culture, of like for emergent ideas, emergent. I mean, like right down to finding new artists and finding new techniques. There's that novelty. And novelty sounds like such a shit word, but that there's an innovation at the heart of what we do, because we know that that's the way that we can interest and engage people, and that does help keep moving things along. And so I would also, and maybe to be a contemporary ad person, you sort of have to hold lots of contradictory thoughts in your mind simultaneously. But I'd also say that we have a huge role in helping society evolve. And if I was being really specific about that, things like how we represent ourselves. It is advertising not a neutral act. Every time you communicate, you reinforce established norms, or you introduce new and emergent ideas and behavior, and you've got to be super careful that the established norms that you're reinforcing aren't detrimental. I feel I've not been really clear on that. Like to be really specific, advertising that ends up making some people in our society and communities feel that they aren't included in the life of the nation, that's not just neutral. That's a problem. And I think, and the idea of inclusion is not just as a sort of almost an academic or theoretical idea, but the idea that I feel included seems very important. And that's part of the moral obligation of advertising is to understand the unintended consequences of our actions. Does that make any sense whatsoever? It sort of did in my head. Yeah,
it does. And I suppose I was also asking in some respects, what do you make of the idea that we can, as if we are a set of policymakers, we can change behavior based on the behaviors that we think should be introduced as advertisers, not what our clients.
Yeah, we've got to be careful about that, haven't we? Because there's huge debates about how representative the industry actually is of anybody else in the nation, and how we get better at at understanding and authentically representing a broad cross-section of society. So there's a bit of me that kind of goes, I understand the power of advertising, and I think it should be used to advance progressive and liberal ideas. But that is very much my worldview. And I think a lot of people got upset more recently, or at least have manufactured the concept of an evil liberal elite that doesn't understand the rest of Britain. I think probably for that construction was for nefarious purposes. I mean, I find it difficult to separate myself from a belief in progress for all of us.
Yeah. Yes. You've read Steve Harrison's book, haven't you?
Yeah.
Can't Sell, Won't Sell.
Yeah.
What did you make of that?
Well, I think I was really honest, and I gave him a really honest review for the dust jacket. I mean, I said to him, "Look, mate, I disagree with virtually everything that you've written, but nothing's made me think about our industry more than this in months." And it came at just the right time during lockdown, because I think I was totally starved of any form of stimulation. But, his premise is almost that advertising's given up the idea of selling because some sort of lefty conspiracy, an anti-capitalist kind of group. I suspect he means of planners more than anything else. Has sort of undermined the essential job of advertising. I really agree with him up to the point. Like, I'm interested in why we why as an industry we've lost the nose for the sale. Like, why we would, so even something like "we sell or else," Ogilvy's famous injunction to the industry, I think you'd find in certain quarters people would debate that, and I find that they go, no, literally no. I mean, whether it's I'm selling you an idea, I'm selling you a new behavior, I'm selling you the idea that you shouldn't drink and drive, I'm selling. But I really bought that, and I was really looking forward to a kind of unpicking that, and I mean, maybe this is my liberal bias itself, but I found, it was a bit much for me that it's all down to lefties. I mean, that's sort of, whereas I think it's much more to do with fashion, creative fashion, strategic fashion. I think maybe the way that we train people, the way that the sort of things we've valued in terms of output in the industry. I think that's more. I don't think there's a conspiracy, but then I would say that, wouldn't I?
Well, yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, what George Osborne at one point said, 90%. I can't remember the stat, but he said something like 90% of the time it's cock up, not conspiracy, which I believe.
But you know that to be true because you when you're working when things go wrong in our industry, in our business, it tends to be cock up and not conspiracy. Like, this is what I think that the vast majority of any harm the industry ever does is because we didn't understand the consequences of an action, rather than we set out like a sort of Vance Packard hidden persuaders.
Yes.
These evil madmen of Madison Avenue. They've got a sort of a kind of dark agenda at heart. I look, honestly, I mean, maybe I can't. My unconscious bias means I can't see this, but 30 years or in the industry, I think it's sort of said, when it fucks up, it's cock up.
Yeah. But I mean, yes, I do agree with that. That as a broad view as well, that, we tend towards suspecting that all consequences, or at least most consequences, are the result of intentions. And I think you're right insofar as, I don't know, but it could be that most consequences are unintended and a side effect of a single intention.
Yeah, and I think, we're two things, that we're so super focused on the intended consequences because, we really try and understand what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do that. But the very fact that we don't really, if we're honest, understand how advertising works. I know that's the big... Yeah. It gives tells you that it actually... It's the unintended consequence that may be the magic. Like why did Gorilla work for Cadbury? Like it seems an impossible. I'm sure somebody will have unpicked that and analysed it. But it seems an impossible cocktail of unintended things that just suddenly. I used to say, maybe we still do, that the only thing that's predictable in advertising is that bad advertising won't work. I think the truth that we know is when we sit down and we create something, we might have a sense that it will be successful. But even if that is the case, we don't know whether you have a Cadbury's Gorilla on your hands or you've just got another good piece of work going out.
Yes, and you actually do see when you're browsing the creative work section of things like Campaign. I don't know about you, but I can see when an attempt at that kind of genius through obscurity has been done. So obviously, Cadbury's Gorilla, great example, because none of it should work on paper.
Yes.
So if I came to you and said, great idea for one of your clients, HSBC, we're going to stick a giraffe at a piano and it's going to tap along to Elton John, and then you're just going to have the brand name at the end. And then I'm subject to a number of questions like, well, what does that have to do with the brand? What are we pushing? How are we, reaching our customers? But it just worked in that example. And you can see when people have tried, let's try something just mad and off the wall, and it doesn't stick. I don't know what's memorable about Gorilla. And as a music person, I'd be tempted to say, well, it's because the track, brand association, but it could be that. But yes, was it the David Ogilvy quote, half of advertising works, I just don't know which half?
I think it goes way back. Lord Leverhulme, I think, and I think that was about, discrete bits of advertising activity. But I really like the idea of repurposing it around. I know how half my, maybe that's it. I know how half my advertising works, but I don't know how the other half is working. There's, and there's joy there, isn't there? And there's magic in that, in the illogicality. Why there's a silly joke about compare the market sounds a bit like compare the meerkat. Why didn't we set up a price comparison website for meerkats? Like, why shouldn't that be sort of like the fact that survived and made it out into the real world is extraordinary in lots of ways, because
it's like a terrible dad joke.
Yeah, and we brought Harvey Keitel back to reprise his role as Winston Wolfe. There was something really deeply wrong and illogical about saying, I'm going to have a gangland fixer front an insurance brand, because that's basically in qualitative research what everybody says about insurance companies. They're and yet if you were the person, if you're the client or the agency or the planner, for fuck's sake, who had said, I don't get compare the meerkat, or I think that it's hugely damaging for our reputation to back Harvey Keitel. Those are serious commercial decisions, because Gorilla, Meerkat, and Winston Wolfe have all delivered phenomenal amounts of commercial value from an illogical decision.
Yes. And of course, the Winston Wolfe example is great because it winks at the we know you think we're all hustlers, and so we're actually going to acknowledge that in our creative idea. And obviously, from your side, we know that it was successful because it kept running. But how was it on your side, having that campaign be as successful as it was, and keep being rebought for so long?
I mean, I think in lots of ways, those are the ideas you live for. Mm. The story's been told so many times, but it seems inconceivable to me now that we pitched with 3 ideas, of which this was one of them, and we were really enthusiastic about the other 2 as well. Not so much. Like it seems to me like one of those 1 in 10,000 ideas and the reason that creative teams, frankly, have to churn through so much work to find. It's not like you're a godlike genius and it just comes to you. You've got to get through all the other stuff. But that decision, and I'm going to say from a strategy point of view, that was pretty hardcore. Here was an organization which couldn't win if only thing that mattered to people was the price of insurance when they bought it, particularly as they weren't on and are not on price comparison websites. The only way they could win is if they asked people to think, no, don't think about the price on its own. Think about, is this going to work when you need it, when you're by the side of the road and it's pouring with rain and, your car's broken down, somebody's broken it. So there is a strong strategic rationale about we need to focus on fixing people's problems, not on the price of our insurance or giving away soft toys. But as a planner, the thing that I still live for in lots of ways is you brief something and you go into that first creative review and somebody tells you something you could never have got to yourself, and is bizarre. I mean, I remember briefing EE and saying it's about putting people at the center of their digital universe back in 2012, about to launch 4G proper broadband on your mobile, not hokey old 3G, with the only company that's going to be able to deliver this into the market. And we're British. We're as British as the day is long. O2's all a bit European, and Vodafone's all a bit European. And so this is a British brand. And I'm thinking Dave Gorman. I'm thinking, and they go, no, Harvey. They go Kevin Bacon, and you go, what the fuck are you talking? And of course, what we end up is this wonderful creation of Kevin's, which is a Kevin Bacon that we know logically is a Hollywood A-lister and lives in LA, but seems to understand what the plot line of Neighbours in the early 1990s and how big Charlie Dimmock was in television gardening programs around the turn of the century. And that's the magic of that. Was this mad moment when they go, I know you've said this, but it's all about this. And I think, maybe what we're warming to is that this desperate need for us. There's a phrase which is when baiting a mousetrap, always leave room for the mouse. And it's often used to help clients not put so much stuff into their advertising, like leave something for the consumer to conclude. But I think also in our process, leaving space for the serendipitous, the mad, the magical, the flight of fancy. Because, my experience and looking at the stuff that I admire most, and I admire most both commercially as well as creatively, it's got something wrong about it.
Yeah. And what do you think about the proclivity to minimize risk and make everything measurable? I want to be able to measure the results of my creativity in a way that maybe precludes those kind of mad ideas. How am I going to be able to measure if that was successful?
Well, I think, yeah. I have to be slightly careful. I'm the chief strategy officer, the advertising agency, serving clients every day. It's got to be measurable as outcome. The question is to what extent you can measure, you can predict its success. Now, what I would say is that every piece of work we did for Direct Line, and remember now, we now switched that creative vehicle up. One of the very few examples of an agency switching out a creative vehicle in full flight when it was hugely successful for this superheroes campaign. But I mean, every execution is pre-tested. Back when I worked, now legendary but defunct agency called HHCL on things like Tango and Pot Noodle, all of that work, So I'm not saying stop pre-testing and everything will be fine, but I think you've got to be able to, you've got to leave some freedom for the magic to happen. Now, good people who evaluate creative work early doors well, whether that's quantitatively or qualitatively, understand that. But often you can be at the mercy of people who and systems and methodologies that simply cannot cope. And that's where you get this sort of drive towards orthodoxy. But I mean, we would just say, I think part of our art often is understanding, what are the rules you shouldn't ever break, stupid to break, and what are the rules that need to be broken right now because they are just horseshit. Yes,
they're not rules that are in place for because they produce a good outcome. They're more like safety barriers or blinkers even,
Yes.
So I want to change lanes a bit now because I don't know how much time you have to spare, but I'm sure there's some interesting stuff that we could dig into I mean, let's start with, for example, Direct Line, the Direct Line campaign. Have you actually had a chance to work with Mr. Harvey Keitel, the wonderful Winston Wolfe? Did you actually be on set and there in the flesh?
I mean, look at me. I'm the planner. I'm always left at home when...
Yeah.
You know...
Sally Miller told me they took the PAs on flights to shoots in Brazil in the 90s. What's going on?
Yeah. I mean, my misfortune was joining the business at the beginning of the 90s when the party was over. No, I mean, you know, but he was a phenomenal value to deliver. I mean, a great idea. He and somebody who might, you know, understood what we were trying to achieve and did a brilliant job. And the same would be true for Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
You know, these are people, and I know that people sort of go, oh, they're celebrity campaigns. I see them very differently. It wasn't really Harvey Keitel. It was Winston Wolfe. That is a conceptual idea around, you know, that literally came from, we had a meeting with the client during the pitch process, and they were saying, no, it's about proper insurance, you know, insurance that puts things right. And I was having a chat with the ECD in the lift on the way out of the meeting, and he literally said, it's a little bit like that scene in Pulp Fiction where Winston Wolfe clears up the mess that Samuel L. Jackson, John Travolta have created in the back of a Chevy Nova. And I mean, I was talking earlier on about those moments. That's one of those moments where you go. So I would say, you know, that was Winston Wolfe. Kevin is a brand spokesman in a classic sense. You think of him now, and you think of the brand, but both of them sharing. I mean, they've delivered phenomenally. Like when you talk about branding and attribution, I mean, like, and we're all obsessed in the industry about distinctive brand assets and mnemonics and like famous vehicles that people recognize as the best way to get your advertising recognized. But yeah, fantastic contribution, and we have swapped him out now for Bumblebee, Donatello, and RoboCop. But I think that was a really interesting journey for me, because few people change their creative vehicle when it's successful. They wait until it's waned, and it's incredibly brave, an incredibly brave client to kind of go, right, let's switch when we're ahead.
Yeah. There's this idea that I first heard at the age of 15 when I saw The Dark Knight, when they say you either die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain. And I always think that is a very brave thing to do, but always the right thing to do. Go out when it's still good, not when people have gotten tired of the idea, not when it's become old, not when it's become predictable. So like you say, retiring the idea.
Yeah, but I mean, you call that, you know, that's as difficult as predicting whether the market has peaked and you should sell your shares. I mean, how do you know, and that's why I think agencies and clients who have huge success find it difficult sometimes to sustain that, because they hold on to what's working.
Yeah.
And then I think that paranoia sets in around, well, you know, when you found a 1 in 10,000 idea, can you find another one? And are you sure you can find another one?
Yeah.
You have to have a lot of confidence or conviction, rather, I think. And like, time will tell, but I mean, the early signs is that the new campaign for Direct Line is as well remembered and effective as Winston Wolfe, where we left off. So you know, I'm kind of starting to feel that that decision was vindicated.
Good, and I hope it's going to be seen as an invincible brand from now on, maybe. But
yeah, and honestly, I mean, like, you know, one of the things that really winds me up is when people say things like it's a low interest category. Like, I think there really isn't. There's just boring thinking. There's not low interest categories. I think you can. I mean, you can. Like we're the Nothing's Impossible agency. You know, that's what we've believed in since our foundation. We chiseled it into the steps at Charlotte Street, where we were for 40 years, and now we were so sort of pig-headed about it. We dug out the step and took it to our new office in Chancery Lane, and to add, we put Nothing's Impossible in 6-foot-high letters on the top of the building to annoy all of the lawyers that kind of felt originally, that's honestly, this is Chancery Lane. What the hell are the hooligans from advertising doing turning up? But Nothing's Impossible. That's a belief that with enough energy and creativity and intelligence, you can get anything done.
Yeah, I sympathise with. I spoke to James Brooke Partridge from Ogilvy for this, and he said he expressed a view I often express myself when people are saying things can't be done. The example is, getting to the moon in 1969 on a pocket calculator worth of computing power. If the challenge isn't as extreme as that, then there's probably a way to get this done, whatever it is.
Yeah, and I mean, you absolutely, like, that's everything for me. And if I was to bring it a little closer to I'm really interested in a brand like Sipsmith and what's happened to the gin category. I don't work on that brand. I don't work in that category at the moment. But, I just remember 10 years ago, if you spoke to any distillery brand, they would have told you that when it comes to white spirits, it was all over for gin. It's about vodka. It's that era where you had, Grey Goose going great guns and Ciroc, and like vodka was where it was at. And then a couple of people decide, fuck that, I'll decide whether I can create a phenomenally successful gin brand. And not only have they done that in Sipsmith, created a successful brand, they've totally revitalized that category. Now, of course, we think that artisan gin is where it's at. And I think it's the people who are, at Saatchi we call it chutzpah, but the people who've got the audacity to kind of go, I'm going to get to the moon by the end of the decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. I mean, like, literally he says that. Now, of course, he then leaves it to everybody else to deliver that. But that's
he checked out involuntarily in his
Indeed,
defense.
He did. But I think that's our, I mean, that's what I believe in, what as an agency we believe in, but it is the industry at its very best. The refusal to believe that, I think that there's a sense of, well, the market has a destiny for my brand or business, and there's little I can do about that. I think that's, there's so many good examples of that being bullshit.
Yeah,
and we're talking a little bit about Direct Line. Don't go on about my favorite insurance company, but it takes a certain amount of audacity to go, we are not going to go on price comparison websites. We still believe in the direct model, and we're going to attempt to rewire the category so that people believe that performance, or enough people believe that performance is important as price.
Yeah. I've been really thrown for a loop by the Direct Line thing now, because there was something very specific that I wanted to ask, but in lack of that, and let's say we've got 10 minutes left just to get your musical flavor out, because that is, after all, that's my brand, is dealing with music. And I want to know what your relationship is with it, because normally, or not normally, but often I'm talking to creatives. What music did you put on an ad, and what got rejected, and what, but I don't know anything about your relationship with it. Why don't you, you might be a massive vinyl aficionado for all I know.
No, I mean, I think, like most people, my kind of musical taste got kind of frozen in my early 30s. But I think it is an enduring issue for us as an industry. The music isn't taken seriously enough.
In It's an issue for your industry. It's an opportunity for businesses like mine.
It's an opportunity for businesses like yours. And frankly, it's an opportunity for brands who take music seriously.
Absolutely.
And there are some brands that really do take music seriously and have historically done so. It's not just the way that it's, you can see it when you lay down different tracks against a piece of work, and it fundamentally changes the meaning of that work. But I still feel a little bit like, and I'm a planner, so honestly, it's not something necessarily that I start the journey thinking about, but it seems to me to have such a manifest impact on if both. I know this is going to sound grand, but on efficiency and effectiveness. So does it create the effect that you want? Does it create the effect that you want? But also the efficiency thing is, do I understand that this is a piece of work from that brand innately because of the musical choice, and it might not be the music itself, and I was thinking the other day about, Mother did an amazing ad for Boots one Christmas that used "Here Come the Girls," and it was phenomenally successful. It was hugely empathetic, really insightful about the role of women during and particularly women who are in female networks at work at Christmas time. But then the client kind of goes, I'm imagining, says, that was successful, let's put it on everything. And then they crush the power and potency. So I think that it's not, I'm not saying get a track and then use it ubiquitously. I think there are huge issues with that. But I think a prowess for particular approach to music can become really powerful. And we saw that in the 90s where Levi's moved musical genres with every single commercial, and yet I just knew, and I mean maybe that's the half the advertising that you don't understand why it works, and I think similarly a brand, I mean it's a cliche, of course it's a cliche, but the way that a brand like John Lewis uses music, it is not famous for a musical track, it's famous for its reverence towards music, and yet I think how often does that production budget start with or have cut out of it a significant chunk for music?
What do you mean? How often does it get a
how often is music treated at the beginning of the process with that reverence? It's all too often. I mean, sometimes music comes early in that journey.
Yes.
Sometimes the director is super clear about their vision and they bring that to you. And then sometimes my experience is you got 20 tracks and you're trying to sift through them.
Yes. I think that's actually something that is definitely something I'd sympathize with. I mean, music is such a powerful emotional communicator that it actually surprises me that it's left as an outsourced part of the creative process, and that agencies don't have their own carved out speciality task force devoted to it because it's because it does command emotions in such a pronounced way. I
wonder whether. So I think what would help in that conversation, honestly, is that the strategic end and the executional end of our process is married together a bit more. Because I think one of the things that might be helpful. I mean, I've slightly sort of derided the conversation about distinctive brand assets, simply because I'm tired of the idea that you can just sprinkle some distinctive brands assets over a piece of work and magically it will be well branded. But it may be helpful in that journey because increasingly clients are thinking about whether it's right or wrong to do so. Sound mnemonics, they certainly have thought for a long time around voiceover and the distinctionsness of their voice, and the association. If we've talked about brand spokespeople and brand characters, the voice is really important, and I would like to see music elevated as part of that triumvirate, not track necessarily, but certainly the treatment of music or the approach to music, because I think that would bring it forward in our conversations.
Yeah, I think you're right. In terms of, you mentioned how often is music considered at the beginning of the process, and often it's considered, well, it's always considered at the beginning of the process, but often in only budgetary terms. How much money are we going to reserve for music? We're going to have $5,000 for a library track, or are we going to put a bit more in for a known track? And that's the big two I always hear in the discussion: known track, brand association. And is that what you were referring to about sprinkling brand assets on it?
I think a little bit. I'm just a bit tired of, we've got a color and we've got a logo and we've got a mnemonic and we've got a brand lockup. And if I just dump all of those into my ad, it'll be well branded. I think to that point about the attribution engine, that's a wanky term, but the work that we've done more recently, that is phenomenal in consumers knowing it's for your brand.
Yeah.
It's a more mercurial cocktail. It's not because the logo's on for 6 seconds at the beginning of any of that stuff. I think it's a really good call, and I honestly I hadn't expected this conversation to be so centrally about that issue. But we know when music is right, it's phenomenal. And the only thing I'd say is, I think in the latter stages of the process, if you can get it right, my experience is that good clients go back for more.
Yes. And my worry is that good musicians, or probably more accurately, record labels, have priced good music out of advertising sometimes. I mean, it's when I spoke to Rory, he said the same thing. He said he knew someone who was making a film and it was set in the 60s, the Kennedy era, so they needed the music to kind of timestamp it, and they just run up against impossible demands because I've seen tracks that you wouldn't consider A-list huge tracks sell for $50,000, and I think that's what I don't know who divides the budget, but I think when they think we're going to need a known track, they just automatically think enormously expensive, and now that's what music seems like, enormously expensive.
Yeah. I mean, same token, artists need to be rewarded. We are using their work for commercial purposes. We're clear about that. But I think we're all also really interested in the way you can work with emergent talent to help them, just as we might work with new directors to get them going. And there's a freshness that comes from that. But I was. There's a couple of things that have been like, I don't know if you've seen Mrs. America. It's set in the late 60s, early 70s or 70s, and it's a beautiful period piece. But I'm Shazamming every fucking track. I thought also the BBC I May Destroy You had sensational music, and I think that's content and not advertising, but we know it makes a difference. But by the same token, I think there was a film about the Beatles came out a few years ago with no Beatles music in it, with sort of ersatz Beatles music, and you're going to go, this simply, why did anybody think that was a good idea? So there's a power in authenticity, and do you know what? I'm sorry about this, but we considered lots of different fixes for Direct Line because I wasn't always certain that you're going to get you truck up to a pitch and you so we maybe it was wrong, and maybe research would say it was wrong. So we looked at lots of different types of fixes, but in the end, there's only one person you're going to call when you're in trouble. You call the wolf. You don't call anybody else. You don't call a sort of mafioso character that or somebody who looks like they've come out of Sopranos, or you call that. And I think that there's a surely something in music around authenticity. Like, you made an effort. Rory, again, I'm sorry, this is becoming a podcast about Rory, but you cannot underestimate the reverence with which I treat him. He talks about this. He's got this phrase, which is advertising is expensive and difficult, because if it wasn't expensive and difficult, it wouldn't be advertising. And what I think what he means there is that there's part of what we do which is which instills a deep sense of an organization's belief in itself and its longevity, and that comes from, to be really blunt, the money on the screen. There's something about effort in advertising that pays off. Maybe that's also about. So I'm a bit harsh there. I'm a bit sort of. I think one of the things about I've reflected on people in our business is we tend to be tribal. Like you're tribal about your brands in a way that. A lot of work with consultancies recently, and consultancies are there to offer best practice. Ad agencies, I think, will die in the trenches fighting for you, so I think there's something about the effort that a brand has clearly gone to, and I feel that when I see a great piece of content where music has been thought about and it's perfect.
And not just been pasted on.
Yeah.
Any examples come to mind?
Sorry?
Any examples come to mind?
Of music pasted on? Well,
no,
I think...
No, of where you could really tell that the effort had gone into it. You gave Boots, obviously.
Yeah. Although I think that was them just pasted on and they drove every bit of value out of it.
So it worked well in one instance and then they tried to just replicate that same
success. Because they went, oh, that worked.
And it wasn't to do with the context.
Completely. And then you have awful, then the agency's saying, well, maybe we'll just have it at the beginning and the end. And it all sort of dies a terrible death. I'm really interested in the move that some clients are making towards scores and their own proprietary music, and whether that works in advertising. I sort of get that mnemonics can work for some brands, in some instances, but our musical scores, the bespoke musical scores, the future, like a bespoke typeface is, or not. So that would be interesting because often they need to be laid down across everything that you make. Whereas I think some of the music that we most enjoy, like, okay, here's an example right now from McDonald's. I think a wonderful piece of work where they welcome people back to their restaurants, and I don't think any of us realised quite how meaningful the idea that we could go back to McDonald's was going to be as a sign of normality returning. And they choose Return the Mac. And it's just a sublime choice. And it tells me it's perfect, obviously, for what they're communicating, but it also tells me something about the pride in their brand, about I don't know, the craft, and maybe ultimately, we like things that are made well. And it doesn't matter whether that's a piece of furniture, a car, or a piece of communication. Craft, like, I'm a planner, I know nothing about craft, but I'm beginning to think that I'm beginning to think about, more interested in the way that craft makes a difference. And we've sort of said it's the idea for too long, and maybe. I spent a lot of time in the 90s where we didn't care about we made scruffy advertising because it was all about the idea. It didn't matter about the craft. And I think that's I'd like to think that's changing. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
What do you mean? As in, we can have not much of a big idea behind something, but if it's beautifully well crafted.
No, and I'm not arguing for that, but I'm just arguing for the return of craft. I had an experience recently, and it's not. Well, no. We did some work for Marie Curie, palliative care organization, and we wanted to talk to people about how important it is to talk about death. And so the idea, which is pretty good, even if I say so myself, it was whatever you call it. We got a million euphemisms for death: kick the bucket, push up the daisies, pop your clogs. And it doesn't matter what you call it, you need to start talking about it, because it's very clear that when we talk about death, it's much more likely that we'll have better outcomes because we talk early about this important subject. So we executed a piece of work campaign that brought to life those euphemisms, both in a very beautiful, charming, animatic style, but also with a bespoke song about what we call death. And I'm convinced that in the context of the traditional sort of rawness of charity advertising, that craft carried that work and made it. It allowed it to live. It became a sort of, we were able to deliver this sort of quite punchy message because there was a beautiful, a velvet glove around it that people wanted, and the people in the organization wanted to use, not just sort of go, oh, well, we'll just push. And so I'm saying it is that craft carries the idea. It's not craft without idea. That's a pop promo.
Yeah. But what about idea without craft? I know.
Well, I'm saying, that's what, we spent a lot of time, and it was a particular moment in time where I mean, a lot of work that we did at HHCL on Hot Noodle and on Tango wasn't particularly well crafted. Often incredibly funny. But we liked the rawness, and then often we were fighting for British brands against sort of slick American brands. Tango was fighting, had a street corner feel to it because it was fighting, this at the time, not now, but this time, the slick imported American Coke. And but I think I almost resented craft at the time. I just thought it got in the way of just brilliant ideas.
A bit pretentious, maybe?
Yeah, possibly. And I have really changed my mind about that. I've totally changed my mind about that.
Yeah. The reason I asked about Steve Harrison before is that I spoke to him last week for the podcast, and he talked about perhaps a new hiring manifesto, so to speak, for the advertising industry, because you got me thinking when you were talking about not great ideas and maybe not much of an obsession about craft. Got me thinking about the fact that maybe advertising, maybe Adland in London is populated by a very particular type of person who seeks it out. And Steve recommended maybe a Dominic Cummings-esque call for weirdos and misfits and people who wouldn't ordinarily be drawn to the industry. But I don't know. Is that something you see? Do you see advertising attracting a not an orthodoxy of people, but something approximating that's phrased more gracefully?
I think it's without a doubt one of the issues that we face as an industry is the diversity of our talent, and I mean that most centrally in order to tell authentic stories that people across society and our nations relate to, and how many kids say, oh, do you know, I really like to go into advertising. I mean, I didn't, and I'm obsessed. So I think that's a massive issue for us, and I do think that at best, we need to attract misfits and people who are wired. That's the only way you get. We're all subject to the same information and stimulus. The only way that you get a creative output is there's something weirdly wired about people that means you say one thing and they come up. You say British icon, they go Kevin Bacon. And it's a small. Or you say I've got a price comparison website and we need to drive salience. Oh, that sounds a bit like you need people who are capable of doing that, and it's not a skill that is particularly ubiquitous. It certainly isn't anything our education system is that interested in. Just for the sake of having a political pop, we do, however, know where Dominic Cummings' injunction got us to, which is one of the worst death tolls in the world, and an absolutely cataclysmic approach to the exam system this year. So I think I'm I'm not prepared to take a leaf out of Dominic Cummings's book, but I'm prepared to listen to Steve when he's calling for some more weird people.
Well, of course, Bernbach was weirdo because he was not an advertiser by trade. I don't know if do you read Dave Dye's blog?
I do, and okay, here, there's somebody who's always exemplified craft. He is, where when it was moderately unfashionable, he still was just achingly wonderful. And Bernbach, I mean, in part, it was that Jewish outsider kind of, background, and maybe like one of Steve Harrison's great heroes is Howard Gossage. I think David Ogilvy was an Argus salesman. There's a value, and Morris and Charles Saatchi were Iraqi immigrants, Jewish immigrants whose family fled persecution in the late 1940s. I think outsiders are the lifeblood of our industry, and yet, we aren't necessarily geared up to make sure they make it to our doors.
Yeah, which is, and that's an additional brief in itself, isn't it? So
it's an additional brief. I think that for all sorts of reasons, it's the brief for the industry this year. I mean, and I don't mean this year and next year it'll be something else, but I've seen more focus, corporate focus on that agenda. We're starting a project called Open Apprenticeships, and lots of people, lucky generals, are trying to bring people in and solve the accommodation problem. That's one of the things that we can manifestly change is how expensive it is to join our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a Mancunian, part of that I'd say is how expensive it is to join London. But
yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it's a really good and possibly completely different podcast. But
yes.
but it is just the fact of the matter that in the UK, advertising is dramatically centralised in London, whereas in the US, okay, for sure, the centre of gravity is in the East Coast and the West Coast. But there are great agencies, Christian Porsche in Miami and then Boulder, Fallon in Minneapolis, Wyden's up in Portland. We don't necessarily, and I'm not, there are incredible regional agencies or agencies around the UK, but it's an odd one, isn't it? And is that nothing to do with advertising? Is that to do with the United Kingdom? I sometimes wonder whether it is the presence of London in the UK is a problem for the UK because it has to contend with having this enormous global city sitting in its sort of bottom right-hand corner with much more in common, I don't know, with Paris or New York or Sao Paulo than it has with the rest of the country.
Yeah.
But it is the case that while there are great agencies in Manchester, in Edinburgh, and lots of other parts of the country, Bristol, lots of creativity in Bristol. London sucks the talent out of. Does.
Well, it does have a huge, it's enormous gravitational pull. It's like a black hole in the, just like sucking everything down to it, as you said. And I'm not resentful about that. I don't have this, fuck London Mancunian attitude, but it is a thing, it is a thing to be addressed. How do we diversify talent geographically as well as everything else? How do we make sure there's stuff going on in Edinburgh, Newcastle, and Leeds?
Yeah, and tell those stories authentically. So, an example, I didn't work on this campaign. I worked on the strategy, but not the execution. Wonderman Thompson did the campaign for HSBC. I'm Not an Island. And there's work in that campaign that is so brilliantly written about Manchester or Newcastle or Edinburgh or Glasgow.
It was a good campaign.
That you can't fake that. You can't sit in London and make that stuff up. You have had to. And I think it's a shortcut, I think, for saying, if we are to properly connect with consumers, we have to be able to tell their stories authentically. This diversity is not a casting issue. Diversity is a storytelling issue. Because otherwise, what you end up with is middle class London stories, but cast with a diverse background of people.
But it's the same story underneath the casting.
Yeah, and there was a time, and if you go back and you look at what happened to our industry in the early 70s, when basically working class blokes came out of art school, not the army, which was sort of the previous generation with officer class, left the army after the war and went into advertising for japes and stuff. You had that influx. People like Dave Trott, still examples of that, who brought a different way of telling stories and different stories and stuff that was much more of the vernacular. And at the time, I think created a distinctive idiom for British advertising, which in television certainly had previously copied the Americans. And so we had that revolution once. We need more of that happening.
Yeah. I wanted to close off on one thing because you mentioned Dominic Cummings, and in Campaign, you said the vacuum of leadership in our political class. And I wanted you to maybe free associate on that a little bit, where you think we are politically. And if you want to go as off the chain as the strategy, the chief strategist of Saatchi's can, the agency that once sold the Conservative Party, what's going on?
Totally. But also, I represented Gordon Brown the 2010 general election. And in a sense, an agency that is politically engaged. So I haven't got any problem with that at all. But I'm going to try and be a little bit objective. It does.
I certainly wasn't accusing you of hypocrisy, in case it came across like that.
Thank you very much. No, I know. And it seems to me that we made a decision to back a populist style of politics just at the time when we needed leadership, not bread and roses, and bread and circuses rather. Yeah. And that has caused huge damage, and the lack of leadership is persistent and woeful. It's almost shameless, honestly. And obviously, that's not a UK specific issue. We've seen that played out in lots of parts of the world. The kind of retreat to populism has caused huge problems. So,
but yeah, I did also think there was some. It's horrible to say in an issue where there have been, let's say innocent lives have been claimed by the pandemic. But I did think there was some poetic justice to the fact that obviously I think the Prime Minister was going to do whatever it took to become the Prime Minister. And I think he did the Brexit thing as a means to that end. And then I think his premiership will be singularly defined by this pandemic.
Yeah, and I wrote very early on, I'd be very critical about government communications and advice and its sort of haphazard approach. I did feel that that initial salvo, around stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives was potent. The fact that they change it every second Thursday has been problematic. But it just came too late, and advertising can only be effective if it's in market. So I'd be interested if anybody can claim that our political class are offering the nation any form of leadership right now. I think we've been left to make it up ourselves, and also it will be the job of our larger organisations, businesses and groups and NGOs that can make a difference to try and sort this out, because I don't think the state seems up for it.
Do you think part of that is because, or part of the problem is that so you talk about populist leadership, which I think is accurate. And do you think it's in the interest of populist leadership not to say or do things that are going to be unpopular? like take an early, a proactive stance on the pandemic.
It's a definition, isn't it? It's a definition. Is that, I think we do want people who, maybe leadership is about, taking the decisions that are unpopular, because you have a clear sense of your duty and a vision for the kind of society or country you're trying to create. I wish that we liked electing people who had a vision, a plan.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the case at the moment.
What do you make of the opposition at the moment?
Well, that's a very, there's no secrets. I'm Labour Party member, and I'm hugely excited by that decision. I think that was not necessarily inevitable that Keir Starmer would win. I found it very energizing. I think he's under a lot of, perhaps criticism for not offering a plan himself. I think it's very difficult for oppositions. It's 4 years to an election. There's nothing we can do about that unless 80 Tory MPs all have by-elections and lose. So you have to play the long game, and it is, there's a cadence to opposition, which is difficult to police, I think. But I at least I look at Keir Starmer. I think that there is a prime minister for us in 4 years' time.
I certainly hope so. I hope so insofar as he appears to know how to speak, which I think is crucial in leadership. I mean,
totally. I mean, and I think maybe I thought those things were important, and then I was sort of maybe that it felt like it felt honestly between 2016 and 2019 that some of the things I had believed growing up as Thatcher's children and growing politically, aware in the 90s, and that some qualities of leadership, they seemed to fizzle out, and that wasn't necessarily what electors were looking for. What I do feel about the decision the Labour Party made to elect Keir Starmer was that it returned to a belief that principles without power is pointless. It doesn't help anybody. What is the point if you're just talking to yourself rather than you're empowered? And every time dear old Tony Blair sort of says anything, he's deluged. And he, personally speaking, I think he destroyed his legacy.
Yes.
Himself. But there was somebody who gave progressive politics in the UK enough power to get not everything done, and why he didn't properly reform the House of Lords. So now it's been gerrymandered and packed full of, freak show of Brexiteers. So I'm not an apologist at all, but he gave us enough power to get some amazing things done.
Introduce the minimum wage, for example.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Sure Start, rebuilding our schools, rebuilding our hospitals.
Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Which I have to keep reminding myself is it's such a tendency to write off John Major. He did start that. I once spoke to Jonathan Powell, who was the government's chief negotiator with the IRA during the peace process, and he was saying that actually what was different about Blair was he believed, maybe this is back to the Kennedy quote, he believed that you could achieve peace in Northern Ireland, and the truth was that no previous prime minister actually in their heart believed it.
Yeah. It's that case of, I'm going to have to quote Star Wars here because, when Luke fails to lift the X-Wing, can't do it. Yoda does it for him. He says, I don't believe it. He says, well, that's why you failed.
Yeah. And I think, we need more people in the world who believe, who are kind of greet the impossible with a sort of bloody-minded determination to prove the world wrong.
Yes. And I like that you at least implied that there is no false dichotomy. Between power and principles. You don't have to choose one or the other.
No.
Which is good. So should we leave it there?
Well, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. I'm sorry. It's typically sort of rambling, emptying of my